Okay. Okay, so welcome. We are thrilled to welcome our special guest today, the talented and versatile author SJ Sophia Bennett. Sophia is a distinguished British crime novelist and children's writer who embarked on her publishing journey at the age of 42. Since then, her work has captivated readers in more than 20 languages worldwide. Sophia's made a significant mark in the literary world with her Majesty the Queen Investigates series. These charming and clever mysteries featuring Queen Elizabeth II as a secret detective have become a beloved part of the cozy crime genre, selling over 250,000 copies in the UK alone. Her debut to the series is titled The Windsor Knot and was met with international acclaim and multi-book deals across the globe. Sophia has also authored numerous award-winning books for young adults, including Threads, which won the Times Chicken House competition in 2009, and Love Song, which was honored as the RNA Romantic Novel of the Year in 2017. Her passion for writing and teaching is evident in her work, and she also hosts a podcast for aspiring authors, offering guidance and inspiration to the next generation of writers. Living in South London, she brings her rich experiences and love for mysteries to every book she writes. Thank you for joining us, Sophia. We're so happy that you're with us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Nadine. That was such a lovely introduction.
Well, you have a lot on your resume. As I was doing some research on you as a writer, I mean, you've done so much, and your life, I mean, just your bio on your website alone is almost, you know, it's just so interesting. I have to ask you about your childhood, because that's a really big part of what you talk about.
Yeah.
You're a self-described army child. What was that like, and how did that influence your writing?
It made me a writer, I think so, in a really big way. So I think both my parents really contributed to the fact that I'm a writer today.
Okay.
My father was an officer in the British Army. And so when I was 7, for example, we left the place where I was very happily at school in England, and we went to Hong Kong, other side of the world. And I lived there for 2 years, went back later on when I was kind of 20 for another 2 years. And in the meantime, we lived in Berlin and all around England, and I've lived in Norway. And so basically lots and lots of traveling. And so I found that as I was changing schools a lot, I'd miss my friends and I'd throw myself into reading. I'm sure a lot of people feel that. I remember there was one time I was talking to a group of librarians and authors, and somebody mentioned how important libraries had been to them growing up. And we were all tearful because libraries had been essential to all of us growing up. They had been our safe place. Very much it was true for me too. School library, mobile library in Hong Kong that looked like an ice cream van traveling around. And my mother was the person who got me into reading by letting me read anything I liked. And she had a massive mystery library wherever we went. She was into mysteries of all sorts. And so so I grew up reading her mystery novels, and that sort of got me here in the end.
That's so great. I know that you mentioned Berlin, and I want to ask you, did the Berlin Wall really run through the back garden of your home?
It did. I remembered it. I mean, I was 14 at the time, and I I've always carried the memory that it literally went around the back of our house. And then I thought, years later, I thought, how could it have done? Because we lived in the west of West Berlin, so we weren't near the bit that everybody sees. And then, of course, I realized, West Berlin was contained within East Germany. So absolutely, it did go. It was our back garden wall was the Berlin Wall, and there was a Russian sentry post the other side of it. And we lived in a camp that had been used by the Luftwaffe. So our house, when the Allied troops came in 1944, they found the smashed glass where the Luftwaffe pilots had thrown the glasses when they were doing toasts. Yeah, and the Russians always thought that the West would attack at Christmas. They thought Christmas was a was a plot by the West to lull them into a false sense of security. So every Christmas time they would kind of ramp up their defenses, and we had security guards patrolling. So it was very, very strange. And then in 1989, I was grown up by then, and I was working in Brussels, and so on TV I watched the wall coming down, and it was, you know, I'd driven through it. I'd really, really seen what it was like at the time, and I knew of so many lives that had been lost, and it was just absolutely thrilling to see those same people who before would have risked their lives to cross it, just standing on top of it and cheering. It was fabulous.
Yes. Oh, that must have been great to see it, you know, and know that that's where you were and you spent so much time there. And, you know, I love what you just said too about libraries being that safe space for everyone. And when you're traveling, how important it is to young people. And I think we see that a lot today.
Yeah.
Libraries do try to be that safe space for all. As I was reading through your biography, and it's clear you have a passion for writing, and in your online biography in your website, it mentions that writing for you has been your power of love moment. And I love that too. Anyone who's seen Back to the Future knows that moment in the film for you know, for the character. So tell us what that power of love feeling is to you.
Well, I mean, I grew up desperately wanting to be a writer, but thinking that it was too much. The idea of failing at writing was too awful to contemplate. And so I just procrastinated for years and years. And I did a PhD in Italian literature, and I became a strategy consultant, and I worked in libraries, and I was a lobbyist, and I was many, many things. Until I gathered the confidence to try. And once I did try writing, I failed, by the way. I failed for 10 years. I failed, like most writers do. And what I discovered was it didn't matter. It was not the end of the world. It was just one book. And when I've taught writing a lot, as you said, and I say to my students, you know, your first book is probably not the book. It is a book, and it probably won't get published. And that's okay. If you are a writer, you'll write another one because you just have to. You can't help it. And maybe that one won't get published, and maybe the next one won't get published, but one day you'll write one that does. And that's what happened to me. It was like my 4th or 5th book was the one that got published.
You know, it's a lesson for so many people. I wish everyone could hear you say that, because we live in this world, I think, where, you know, your words are out there, and people have this expectation of instant success sometimes. And writers, even young writers, especially who are coming up with writing, do have that expectation. This is their great book happening right now. And I've spoken to some.
It's difficult because if for the very few people that happens to, it's a great story. So that those are the stories that we tell each other is, oh, you know, this 18-year-old wrote a book and it got published. And what we don't say is, yeah, and then these 2,000 other 18-year-olds wrote books that didn't get published, but later, much later, they wrote one that did. And actually, that you've talked to so many successful people who say, thank goodness I wasn't successful when I was 18 because I wasn't ready. You know, and as you said, I was 42. I'd done many other things, and I was ready for the highs and I was ready for the lows, and they were both. So it was much better for me that it happened when it did.
I've also heard from some authors that writing, when they do have almost like a one-hit wonder type of thing, the second book is really difficult. And I'm wondering with your series, because The Windsor Knot really did so well, was the second book in the series a little challenging? Were you nervous? Like, how did that go? Because the second book could be rough.
I was given a fantastic piece of advice during my 10 years of not being published, which I followed, which helped a lot. And that piece of advice was, it can take as long as you like to write your first book that gets published, or in this case, it was my 11th book, but it was the first one for adults. You can take as long as you like because nobody is waiting for that book, you know. But when it comes to the next one, everybody's waiting, and you've got, you know, a year to turn it around, and the pressure is suddenly on. And so if it's already half done, because you kind of kept going after you wrote the first one, that really helps. So
Good.
that was the case. So by the time I was getting an agent for the first one, the second one was half done. And actually, the second one, which in America is All the Queen's Men, was my favorite one to write. I loved it.
Ah,
I knew my characters. I didn't think I would because it's set at Buckingham Palace, and I do not like Buckingham Palace. The royal
oh,
family does not like Buckingham Palace. It's drafty. It's 775 rooms. It's not friendly.
right.
It's a great place to entertain people, one of the best in the world, but it's not a great place to live. And for most of the Queen's life, until like the last year or two, there were buckets collecting rainwater, and it was falling apart.
Oh
So
my
I thought I would
goodness.
enjoy writing about it, but actually it was an enormous pleasure because the more I found out, like it has a swimming pool, it has a post office, it has a bank, it has all these really strange things that you might not expect. The garden has possibly part of the National Tree Collection. So I loved writing about it, and I loved what Rosie, the sidekick, got to do. I loved making up the tunnels, which I think really exist anyway. But so it was. In fact, I love the book. I love the art history side of it because that's my thing.
Right.
Loved writing about Artemisia Gentileschi. So second book, easy. Third book, nightmare.
Oh,
So for me, it took a while to catch up with me. I found the third book really difficult. And I think that was partly because I was writing it after lockdown. And I think a lot of us found we were okay writing during lockdown. But what was happening was we weren't refilling the well. I didn't really understand this concept, the well of creativity.
yes.
And so when we came to write a year later, we hadn't been doing anything creative for the last year. So we'd used up all our ideas writing during lockdown, and now it wasn't that I'd run out of ideas, but I did struggle, and also I was writing about very rich people, and I was finding the world was a very contentious place, and so
Mm,
I struggled with that one. But
yeah.
what I loved about Murder Most Royal was it's about rewilding and bringing wildness and biodiversity back to life, and it's about cold water swimming and finding your energy through swimming in in these freezing waters. And I obviously I did research into both of those, which was hugely pleasurable. So it had its good sides as well. And writing about all the animals in that book obviously was just
Yes.
joyful.
Oh, that's so great. So tell us how you went, what the inspiration was to go in the direction of Queen Elizabeth as a secret amateur detective. Because that is like when and I will tell you, one of my colleagues introduced your series to me, and she's a cozy mystery reader, and typically I'm not. I'm more of the dark and twisty kind of
Okay, sure.
thrillers, right? But I absolutely love I haven't been able to put them down, and that's why I had to reach out to you because your books are so popular here and everywhere. But when she was describing the book to me, and she said Queen Elizabeth is a detective, and I just, it took me a minute. How did you wrap? What was the inspiration for that? How did you wrap your head around that? That's so bold. I love it.
Thank you. My original plan was to write a series about a billionaire cyborg detective, which one day I do want to write. But it wasn't working, and I'm really glad I didn't write it because my plot was terrible and it wouldn't have worked. And I was trying to write this unwritable book. And I was thinking about the first season of The Crown, which had been on shortly before. And I'm sure lots and lots of people have seen that. And I thought Claire Foy playing the young queen was fantastic.
Yes.
And
Oh,
she was amazing. It was amazing. I haven't enjoyed the later series, but I loved that first one.
I
And
agree.
there was just one scene where she was with her private secretary and he had a model battlefield, and she picked up a soldier absentmindedly and put him down in the wrong place. And it was a funny moment, but I just thought she wouldn't have done that because my father was in the army. He met her many times one-on-one. He said she was one of the very best people he ever met at understanding regimental history. He made model battlefields, and it's always a particular battle. You don't just make it up. It's Waterloo, or it's something famous, and she would have
Right.
known that. So she would have been too polite to pick up a soldier, and even if she had, she'd have put him back in the right place because she would have known where he went. And I just thought, I am really obsessively kind of freaky about accuracy about the Queen. I know a lot. So I had that thought, and then I started thinking, because I was thinking about detectives, I thought, well, if something went wrong in Buckingham Palace, she would certainly notice and know what was going on, because she knew everything about it, because it was her life, and because everybody was looking at her, and so therefore she would see things that nobody else would spot. And I just had this idea that the clue that unraveled everything would be something only the Queen would notice, and it was in the Windsor Knot. And I love that. I love that. I mean, if people have read it, the clue is a medal, and it's something that nobody else would really spot, but it means a lot to her. And it's a very, very tiny conversation around that medal that just doesn't make sense to her, and that's how she solves the murder. And having a character like that, I just thought I have to write these, and it has to be me, because I know what I want to say, and the settings, you know, I mean, not at the time, not Buckingham Palace, but Windsor Castle and Sandringham and Balmoral, and particularly the traveling, because my parents, when we were in Hong Kong the second time, my parents were at a cocktail party on board the Royal Yacht Britannia in the harbour. So, you know, that's when my mother met the Queen. And so when people say, oh, this, you know, everybody says she sparkles. She did. Something about her face powder, she actually did sparkle. She wore a lot of diamonds. That didn't hurt. So that was actually kind of quoting from my mother. I have Rosie's granddad saying that the Queen sparkled, but actually Rosie's granddad is my mother in that particular case.
I was going to ask you, and that do you tend to bring some of the people from your family or personal life into the personalities of your characters as well? So that's very interesting that
I do, and that's the way that I do it. So I never write
that.
one of my relatives or one of my friends exactly, but I completely do bring in little anecdotes, little characteristics. It's fun. I enjoy that very much.
So clever. You know, I think we all love Rosie as a character, and she's really from the minute we meet her, she's super cool. Can you tell us more about how she came about, her role as the Queen's assistant? She's quite a dynamic personality, but she keeps that same. She's good at keeping a secret. I think we all aspire to be a little like Rosie. So tell us how she came about in the writing.
I aspire to be a little like Rosie. I adore her. I took a year. I actually wrote another book, which is called, I think it's called Women Artists in America. I wrote it for the Tate, as in the Tate Gallery. And while I was writing it, I was thinking about how to write this book. And I couldn't until I created Rosie, because I just felt I didn't want to write just about a rich old white woman. I did want to write about that particular one because I think she's very extraordinary. But I live in South London. It's very, very multicultural, and I teach writing, and all my students are a very multicultural group. And I just thought, I want to write about my world, so I want to represent that. And I needed my sidekick to come from that world. And Rosie is actually slightly based on one of my students who is Nigerian heritage. And she's very loud and enthusiastic and fun. And I just thought the contrast, sort of superficially, the contrast between her and somebody, you know, very proper would be great. But underneath, they're the same. They're intelligent, motivated women. Yes. So actually they have a lot in common. So I as soon as I had that idea that she'd be Nigerian heritage, that massively helped. And then partly she's me, because I interviewed for the job that she's got. I didn't get it, she did. And partly she's all the things that I felt I didn't have that would have been useful. So she can ride. I can't ride. She's very, very good at maths. I love maths, but I'm not brilliant at it. And she's got this army core of steel. She'll go to the dangerous places, which is not me either. And so I love her. So when she goes into the tunnels in book 2, I'm thinking I would never have got into the tunnels. She's crazy. But you know, it's kind of the kind of thing she would do.
I love her character. And you mentioned how you wrote these during the time, it kind of coincidentally with The Crown, like it was very timely that these came out. And the Queen and the Royals are, you know, always incredibly well known in the world and popular, but with TV and streaming and people home and getting more interested in The Crown and the stories like that, you know, how do you balance I guess the historical accuracy of the books with the fictional part of it, because you do it really well. So
Thank you.
how, what's involved in that?
It's a joy. It's my favorite bit. When I started out, I planned to be incredibly lazy. So I thought I'll set them in the recent past. It won't be any particular year, any particular time. And I thought the recent past would be good because then I wouldn't have to research it because I would just remember. And then I ended up just thinking, well, what was the Queen doing? And I do a bit of research and I think, well, actually, her 90th birthday was really interesting and an optimistic time because the royal family have their ups and downs, as we all know. But 2016 was a really good year for them. So so I set it then, and then I discovered that the Times newspaper has, the Royal Diary for all their official engagements every day. So if I wanted to, which it turned out I did, I could find out every single thing the Queen officially did. And if I read magazines like Horse and Hound and Majesty magazine, I could find out all the unofficial things she did because, she's just in the magazines a lot. So then it became a game. So I had a spreadsheet of my murder and all the things she had to do with Rosie against what she was really doing. And for the first 3 books, I was absolutely accurate. So I'm way more accurate than The Crown. They merge things together that happen years apart. They make things up in public, and I don't. So if I say the Queen did something publicly, she did. If I say she wore a pink jacket that day, she did. If I say she wore a particular diamond brooch, that's what she was wearing. And I get a lot of pleasure out of that, and it gives me ideas for the plot as well. So there's one in book 2 when she's posing for a portrait, or she's unveiling a portrait of herself, and she's thinking about the Irish peace process. And I hadn't planned to put that in at all, but I was looking to see what she was wearing that night, and I discovered this event, and it just really fitted with the feminism that I wanted to write about. So that went in. So I really enjoy getting those big moments right, and then fitting in my plot around her downtime. So hopefully it's really obvious to readers. If she's thinking about murder, I made that bit up. And if she's meeting someone in public, I did not. That's how it goes. Yeah, and really... when I write about one of her horses winning £50, a £50 Tesco voucher, that happened. Yeah, I didn't make that up.
I think it's really important for readers to know that too, that there is so much historical accuracy. It just brings to life really the joy of the Queen and the royals when she really was wearing that pink dress. And you can, as librarians and as a library, we love when people read a book and then go and do a little research on their own, right? They go to look to see, oh, what does this place look like? We have readers who love to go on Google Maps because maybe they can't travel anymore or whatever. So they go and visit the places, and you went and revisited the articles that to see the history of the Queen and her movements and activities. And I think that that's so great. It just brings so much more to the stories that we love. You obviously
her life was so fascinating. Why make up something boring when actually the truth is really interesting? I often find that. And yeah, I mean, I find I'm learning, and so I hope readers can learn too. And so from now on, now that I've gone back in time in book 4, which will be coming out officially in the States later this year, which I'm really excited about, and I now have historical notes in the back, so I can say, this bit happened exactly as I said, this bit I've tweaked a little bit, this I've sort of merged 2 things together very slightly. So for example, I had a meeting Duke Ellington in book 4, and in fact she met him the year before, but the conversation that they had is very close to the one that they really had. So it's nice explaining to readers that this is how I did it, how I sort of stitched it together.
So that book is coming out in 2024?
Yes. Yes, December, I think it's down for.
Yeah,
finally. Excellent. I got so many messages from readers saying, when is it coming out? When is it coming out?
That's on my list, my questions.
Yeah, so well, I mean, so literally, I pass, if any of the listeners here, the readers here have got in touch with me, I listened and I said to my agent, what can we do about this? Because it's possible to buy the hardback from the UK and have it shipped, but you can't get it in audio, and you can't get it in ebook, and you can't get it in libraries, which is frustrating. And my agent took me seriously and said, okay, I'm going to get you a publisher for this one. So HarperCollins only did the first 3. And so we needed a new publisher, and we've got them. And I can't say too much about it right now, but we're in the process of signing contracts, which is lovely. And yeah, because it's already, you know, all the work's been done, they can publish it quite quickly. So yeah, December.
That's exciting. We'll be waiting patiently for it. Sophia, thank you. So let's talk about Queen Elizabeth a little bit. How do you approach developing her character? How did you, let's go back to the start of the first, of the first book, The Winds Are Not. So how did you develop her? You mentioned a little bit that you liked the actress in The Crown and her, and I have to agree with you. I think she was dynamic in that role. How did you go about doing this for the novel?
Again, during that first year when I was trying to get the Rosie character to come to life, I struggled. I couldn't do it. It was sounding caricaturish. I couldn't find it. And if anyone has read The Winds Are Not, they'll know the first scene that she has with Prince Philip, when he says, did you, this guy found strangled like a Tory MP. And you talk about the little old lady in the hat and how shocked people will think she is, and she just kind of isn't. That was the first scene I wrote that made it into the novel. And so as soon as they started talking to each other, I thought, oh, I know these people. I know people of that generation, and I know how feisty is slightly the wrong word, but how feisty they are, how interesting they are, how underestimated they can be, how fun they can be with each other, how if they've been married for a very long time, they can get on each other's nerves. I just thought I know this, and it's fun to, really fun to write the dialogue of. So that's when she came to life. And then I went back to the beginning of that, and I had her on her horse, on her pony, looking at Windsor Castle and thinking about her life. And so she grew through the dialogue for me. And I guess the Queen that I'm trying to write about has a huge sense of responsibility from the word go, that she never ever lets go of, combined with a massive sense of humor, which I don't think The Crown has ever captured. And that's one of the problems I have with the series. But that's what I think kept her going. Huge love for her husband, thank goodness, the two of them kind of holding each other up for decades and decades. And love for her animals. And also, I think if she hadn't been Queen of England and everywhere else, she could have been a very respected professional dog trainer and horse trainer. But she was truly exceptional at both of those, apparently. So this was the woman that I had in mind, and someone who is obviously very clever, because you just can't be that good at international relations and not be very clever, even if she wasn't intellectual. So I get very cross when literary people say, well, she wasn't clever because she didn't read lots of books. I think she did read them. She didn't talk about them very much. But that's not the only way to be clever. I think if you can know the right thing to say to Bill Clinton and Leonid Brezhnev and Putin and whoever, and never put a foot wrong.
Yes.
Got something going on there. That's amazing.
And I was going to bring this up a little at the end of our discussion, but I'm going to say it now because we're sort of on that topic. I mentioned wanting to be a Rosie type character. Like I would, we all want to channel our inner Rosie, but I think what you do differently, and I've had this conversation with other readers, is you also make us want to be the Queen, and not for the Queen for who she is in her public persona, but in her private persona. How often is it that you read a book about an older woman with the, that really she is all those things you just mentioned. You made this character be funny and smart and loving and have a successful marriage despite the public, and everything that, you just kind of, wow, she's a little bit of a, I'm going to say it, a bad, a woman. And at her age, and it's really, I think, so great and so different from some of the other characters that we see, which are also good, but I think that's what sold me so much of these books, was that her little internal dialogue sometimes was really funny, and her little side comments are great. And of course, and her love of animals. I mean, that also was, you know, true, but wonderful to see that you brought that into the stories, you know, as well. So I know those are some of my personal feelings, but I know that they are what some of the discussions I've had in the library
So
with our
nice.
readers. What do you feel are some of the main themes that readers should explore, you know, that can explore from these stories?
Well, I think something you were capturing there really well, Nadine, was that there is an underlying thread of feminism in there, because, you know, I talk about, you know, the only skirts in a sea of trousers, and it's what fascinates me about feminism of the Queen's generation is it can be being very feminine, exerting power in a very, very subtle way, making the powerful men around you feel good about themselves, not bad about themselves, but also doing what you want them to do. I find that really interesting. So I love exploring that. And I love exploring Rosie's sort of younger generation version of that. And so with the new book, when I go back in time and I have to have a new sidekick because Rosie wasn't born then, but it's a similar dynamic of two women just subtly and quietly and without confrontation making things go the way they want them to go. So yeah, I enjoy that very much. So I think there are those themes. The big one when I was writing The Winds Are Not was, so that I was writing it post 2016 and a lot of things had happened. But
Yes.
I wanted to imagine a world in which our leaders, so it could be the coach of your team. By the way, right now I'm totally invested in Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift and Andy Reid and Jason Kelce. I am an expert. And I was talking to my husband just now, this evening, about how Andy Reid is such a fabulous NFL coach. And this is what I'm talking about. Andy Reid reminds me of the Queen. She would remind me of Andy Reid. Having someone who cares deeply, who deals with difficulties with grace, who doesn't sell people down the line, who brings a sense of humor to it, but you always know exactly who's in charge. Isn't it lovely to live in a world, be it a school or wherever you are, or an office, if you're very lucky that way, where the person in charge makes you feel good about yourself? And I think the Queen deeply wanted to do that. And so that was what I wanted to bring across, because I thought after she dies, people might not know that about her, that was a special gift that she had. And other people might not have that. I think actually King Charles now is showing that he has it too. I wasn't sure whether he would or not. I didn't know.
Yes.
But it's nice to see. I think he has it too.
Is.
One of the things, I was talking to somebody, actually, funnily enough, I was talking to someone who died recently, and the Queen Camilla went to his memorial service a couple of days ago. But I was speaking to him last year or the year before and saying, you know, what can you tell me? And one of the things he said was, back in the day, one of the first things the royal family would get you to do, if you were meeting them, was ask if you wanted to smoke. They were not trying to addict you to cigarettes. It just, most people did. And that was how they relaxed, and they assumed they couldn't. And so to be told, you know, you can just do what you do around us, that's fine, just be yourself, that was their powerful instinct, was to make people feel at home. So I wanted to get that across, I guess.
Yes.
And that's why one of my favorite scenes to write was the one where the Obamas visit Windsor Castle.
Yes.
And I'd just been listening to Michelle Obama read Becoming, and oh, I'm such a fan. And she described the relationship that they had, and I felt there were two people who were good at making people feel welcome. I kind of recognized a kindred spirit, so that was nice to write about.
Yes, that's great. Oh, I think there's so many different themes, and you know, I was drawn very much to the feminism and also to the relationships between the women and between the Queen and Rosie, for example. And there was you mentioned it, there was definitely you know, we knew who was in charge, but there was also a deep connection between the women and respect that I think was really so great to read about and see their friendship develop, as well as their professional relationship, right? So I want to just go you touched on this a little bit, the actual crimes that take place that set the stage for the stories. So where do you take those from? Are they inspired by like a real life crime, or are those purely fictional? I mean, a hand washing up on shore, like these types of things. How does that come about?
So the first one was going to be a stabbing, and I was trying to write it and it wasn't working, and it sounded like medieval, it sounded made up. And I said to my husband, what shall I do? And I already had the title, The Windsor Knot, which is the particular way that you can tie a tie. And he said, well, if it's called The Windsor Knot, it has to be a hanging. And I said, I can't write about a hanging. That's horrible. And he said, you're writing about murder. You plan to write about a lot of these books. Hello. I thought, yes, you're right, actually. I need to go there. So as soon as he said that, and he's so helpful to me, I thought, right, so the murder came from the title, and the title came from the place. And often the place is what inspires me. So that was the first one. And the second one is inspired by a true event. So there is a broken glass, which causes a lot more damage than you would expect. And that is absolutely based on something I read in the papers. There was a man who didn't die, but very nearly died, could have died, by just dropping a whiskey glass and falling on it accidentally. I thought that was so interesting. So that was that one. And then the hand, there was originally going to be a body on the beach.
Oh.
And then I just thought that was too much, I think. I love the idea of the signet ring. So I talk about, the idea that the Queen is the one who she sees the clue.
Yes.
So I quite like the idea of her identifying someone through this very kind of old-fashioned aristocratic kind of thing of having a signet ring with your family crest on it. So that's how that one happened. Yeah, it wasn't too super gory. But it's often the case, isn't it, with cozy crime, that if you think back to what actually happened, if you unwind it, often the murders in cozy crime novels are just as terrible as they are in really, really dark fiction.
Yes.
It's just that we don't harp on about it quite so much. But the crime in Murder Most Royal is very horrible. It's just that, you have to piece it together yourself as a reader, I suppose.
Are you a true crime? Are you a follower of true crime? Has become so popular as a podcasting genre, as a TV, Dateline, all of those things. Is that something you consider yourself a fan of, if you can be a fan of true crime? But
I haven't particularly got into it. I have nothing against it. And I heard some of the original podcasts that kicked it off, that got people freed from jail who'd been wrongly convicted. And I just thought that was deeply, deeply wonderful, that somebody had really committed to making the police revisit what they've done and serving justice. And so that was fabulous. But yet I still somehow haven't got into the podcast genre. I love Only Murders in the Building, though. So I guess I love it when it's fictionalized.
Yes. Yeah, that's a great one for sure.
Yeah. I couldn't say why. It's just, time, I guess. Only so much time.
How do you keep the plot so engaging and fresh? I know you mentioned the new book is going to go back a little bit. How do you plan for that? Keeping readers engaged. Do you have, a method to that?
There's a certain amount of panic. There's a certain amount of setting myself up. So I think with all of them, I mean, I stage the murder. I have a very visual sense, and I want it to be something where the TV scene in which that appeared would be something that would really grab the viewer's attention. So that's what I'm thinking of. So I set this up, and then I think, blimey, how do I get from that to what really happened? What did really happen? And I work backwards a lot of the time, give myself huge problems. Some of your viewers may be fans of Ruth Ware, for example,
yes,
who wrote In a Dark, Dark Wood. She's a friend of mine and hugely supportive. And I remember with the new one, with number 4, I was saying to it in a Facebook group, how could the murder be done so that this would happen and that would happen, and people wouldn't work this out, and they would only find that out later. And Ruth was fantastic. She said, oh, you would have to do it this way, and that this would have to be involved. And so if anyone reads book 4 and they get to the bit where it's explained how it was done, Ruth Ware has a lot to answer for, because she really helped me untangle the mess I'd got myself into. It was very cool.
That is fabulous.
Yeah, it's really fun. Yes, don't ever get into any kind of argument with with Ruth, because she's really good at killing people and getting away with it. That's all I can say.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so it is interesting that way. And then I'm writing, I'm plotting, and then I suddenly think there needs to be another murder. And then I have to think, what's it going to be? Who's going to die now? It doesn't, yes, normally that doesn't come naturally. And then I really wrestle with getting all these plot beats in the right place. And then it's lovely. At some stage, it feels very natural. And when I get to the edit, it looks like it was always going to work out that way, but it wasn't. It's hard work.
So do you sit and meet with other, I love the fact that you meet with Ruth Ware. That's excellent. Do you meet with writers to go over your story as you're writing it, to get feedback? I know some authors like to wait until the end to get feedback. Do you do it as you're writing? And what's the process for you with getting some, maybe constructive criticism or things like that?
Usually my first reader is my lovely husband, Alex. And that's been true. Even when I was writing novels for teenage girls, he somehow tapped into his teenage girl, and his advice has always been spot on. And actually, with the first early chapters I did of The Winds Are Not, I gave them to him, and he said, they're not good enough. Go back and do them again. And he was right. So I did. And that was before I got into the whole Queen and Prince Philip talking and things. So my husband is involved. But yes, there's a fantastic, she's actually an American writer of Sherlock Holmes stories called Bonnie McBird. And she lives in London now. She lives about a 2-minute walk away from 221B Baker Street. I mean, it is extraordinary. And she does fantastically detailed historical research. I'm seeing her tomorrow. We're going to the Chelsea Flower Show together, which will be wonderful. And so Bonnie is one of the first readers for me, as I am for her. I'm reading her latest Sherlock Holmes novel for her right now. And we have a writers group, some in America, some here, and we share chapters. So that's really helpful. So yes, I get feedback that way, which is very useful. But the plotting I do tend to do, I do it on my own to start with, and then I only test it on other people once I've really wrestled with it. I have a spreadsheet and I've got it all to work the way I think it should. But in terms of other writers, one of my favorite events is every July. The crime writers in the UK go to Harrogate together. And we go to Harrogate because that's where Agatha Christie went in 1926 when she disappeared. And she went to this hotel called the Old Swan, and that's where she was discovered after her famous disappearance.
Yes.
And so in her honor, and I think she would hate this, I really do, but in her honor, that's where we all go. And we have a wonderful time. And Ellie Griffiths is there. Ruth Ware is actually in charge of the programming this year. Last year, I chaired a panel with Ellie Griffiths and Mark Billingham, and I'm trying to think, Ian Moore, who writes French-based cozy crime. He's very, very funny stand-up comedian in his own right. And Richard Coles was supposed to be on the panel. I think Ian stood in for him. And a fantastic Finnish writer called, I can't say his name right, Antti Taumainen. He doesn't say it that way. He glares at me whenever I say his name, but he's a very funny, dark Finnish crime writer. Highly, highly recommended. So yeah, so we have a huge amount of fun. We all get drunk together in the tent outside, and yeah, and share ideas. So that's what I'll be up to in July.
That is so great. Oh, I would love to be a fly on the wall there. What kind of reactions are you getting from your readers about your portrayal of Queen Elizabeth II? What have you heard? I mean, I know I love it, and we love it here. But what kind of reactions have you heard, especially when the books first came out?
It's been joyful. It's been joyful. The book first came out in the UK in 2020. So if you think back to 2020, there was a lot going on, or rather there was not a lot going on, sadly. And people really needed refuge. They really needed escape into something warm. And actually, I got a lot of responses from readers who, frankly, I'm afraid to say, had lost family members, and they were in a dark place, and that's why they were turning to warm fiction that, you know, just something to
Yes.
put their mind off it. And I remained so honored to be able to help a little bit in just giving somebody, you know, somewhere to escape to. And I suppose the people who write to me are people who like that thing I was talking about, where living in a slightly fantasy world where the person in charge is reliable. And they like that very much. Everybody loves Rosie. I think most people have their favorite scene, is one of my favorite scenes too, which is Rosie in the underground train.
Mm-hmm.
If you know that scene, you know that scene. I plotted that scene with my father. I said, what would happen here? What would happen now? We acted it out together. So I'm very fond of that scene. It's very warm. It's very, very positive. And I was so nervous, you can imagine. I mean,
Oh,
it could have been anything. It could have been, you know, how dare this author make fun of the Queen? Or it could have been, you know, we don't like the Queen. How dare this author write about her at all? I mean, I wasn't sure. But I think people who aren't interested in the Queen simply don't read the books. So I don't get that. And people who are interested in the Queen feel that I haven't sort of belittled her or anything, which I didn't want to do.
not at all. As a
So
matter of fact, you've really brought some aside to her, I think, that goes beyond, like you said, the crown and other things that we might, you know, fans of the royals and of the Queen might have seen in other places. You've actually allowed readers to have a little bit of their own imagination go into this persona, and it's been really fun to do, really fun to do. And I'm not at all
I do
surprised
think
to hear of that. You had such warm feedback from
it's been really lovely. I mean, I think if the Queen had been as kind of fussy and prissy as some people would just assume that she
yeah.
was, she wouldn't have survived in her job, because you have to laugh, you know. So many things would go wrong. The pressure of being watched the whole time is so dramatic. The only people who can cope with that level are people who have a sense of humor, I think. I mean, in terms of being a public figure, Nelson Mandela, you know, he had a sense of humor. You know, the current Pope has a sense of humor. You just kind of have to, otherwise you crumble. And so yeah, I think it's important to understand sort of how there's, I think she's a great figure, how there's great figures, kind of what they do behind the scenes, which is just crumple up with laughter most of the time when something's gone badly wrong.
It's good advice for all of us to just look at the bright side and the sense of humor in things sometimes. And even those who we think are, you know, we hold up on pedestals, still, I think, you know, when you go inside and you find the humor in life, it's much easier, right?
Yeah.
And the warmth and the love. So you mentioned you have this book coming in 2024. Do you have any idea how many books you plan to write in the series?
How many I'm allowed to. I mean, I have detailed plans for 5, 6, and 7. I'm writing 5 now. It's been slowed down by my health, but hopefully I'm going to be kind of back on track. It's called The Queen Who Came In From the Cold, which is a title I am so delighted by. And it's set in 1961 when the Queen went to Venice, and Venice is one of my favorite cities. So I really can't wait to write about that, and quite a lot about the Royal Yacht Britannia as well. And then I want to write one set in the Caribbean in 1966, which is the year I was born. And then I want to go back to one starring Rosie, because it's written in my head and I haven't finished with Rosie yet. And this book is a really important one about her. So I want to write that one. And then I want to write one where the Queen goes to America and stays with friends who are racing people. And if, I mean, maybe some of your readers like Dick Francis stories set in the British racing world, and I want to write one of those but set in America, where, I mean, the Queen was a total expert. So yeah, she somehow solves the crime. I don't know what the crime is yet, but I want her to solve it. She could be staying with President Reagan, maybe, you know, like she did. That would be a fun thing to do. So yeah, so that will be 8. And then I want her to go to Australia, and the Hong Kong one, I want that one set in 86 when my parents met her. So I've got about 10 or 12 that I'd like to do,
I
ideally.
love that. Oh, we are thrilled to hear this. We are thrilled to hear this. That is great news. When you were doing some of these, the research for this about the Queen, are there any interesting facts that maybe some less well-known things that might have surprised you that came about while you were researching her that you could share? Or even maybe things your folks told you?
Come across them all the time. One of my favorites was this chap called Ian Farquhar who died, who was a huntsman. As I say, died very recently. He was very good friends with the royal family. I was saying, anything you can tell me. And he said, well, we were talking about the corgis and the dorgies. So I don't know if people know about dorgies, but dorgies are a cross between dachshunds and corgis, because Princess Margaret has a dachshund called Pippin, who was really naughty. And Pippin had a puppy with one of the Queen's corgis. Wasn't supposed to, but did. And out of it came a dorgie, which they loved. And so they bred more of them. And Ian and his wife went to visit Windsor Castle one day, and the Queen said, oh, you must come and see the litter. They've had a new litter of dorgies. Do you want a puppy? And Ian kind of didn't want a puppy. He had enough dogs, thank you very much. But when the Queen says, do you want a puppy? You have to say yes. So I love the idea of the Queen thinking,
That is
I'm going to get rid of some of these puppies. I'll just ask people if they want one.
Oh, that's so funny.
There was another one that, corgis, by the way, were bred to bite the ankle of cattle. So they're Welsh cattle herding dogs originally, and which is why they're quite bitey and naughty. And they're not bred to collect birds from fields the way cocker spaniels are, and that kind of thing. But obviously the Queen was so good with them, she did train hers to do that. And somebody said they once saw her with an almost ungettable bird out on the moors in Scotland. And they said nobody else could have got the dog to do this, but she was just so good with dogs. She could do this sort of incredible feat. So I like that idea of her just being so professional.
Yes.
Let me think. Yeah, I just come across them all the time. I mean, as something that comes out in book 4, I love the reaction of 2 Americans to her and Prince Philip. Like, it's not just me who thinks she's amazing. She and Duke Ellington were massive fans of each other. And you'll see in the book
who was it?
Sorry,
who
Duke Ellington.
Oh, okay.
The jazz musician. So she thought she loved jazz, and he, having met her, I don't think he expected to be particularly impressed, but he was. So he did something really wonderful for her after they'd met. So that's in the book. Oh, I'll tell you another thing that's also in the book is somebody who helped her write her very first speech for UK television was Daphne du Maurier. So I'll leave that with everybody, and the book explains why that happened.
Okay.
But yeah, I thought that was interesting.
Oh, I love the teasers. Thank you. That's great. Oh, can't wait. So I know you mentioned that you set this up in your head as something you would see on TV, which makes me want to ask you if there's any plans for us to see this character that you've developed of the Queen and her and the other characters in the book on the big screen, streaming. Can we see anything like that? How can we make this happen, Sophia?
There was a plan to make something even last year or the year before. I sold the TV rights to a company who are absolutely fabulous. You've made lots of programs that people will know. And there was a plan to do it, and then it kind of didn't come together, and then the Queen died, and then it was just felt to be, it just wouldn't work to put an elderly Queen on screen so soon after she died, and I completely agree. So they said, can you write something further back in time? And I was going to do that anyway, and so I wrote book 4 set in 1957, largely with the TV people in mind. It was an enormous pleasure to do, so I didn't mind at all. And I think they're still working on it, but I mean any author will know that it takes years and years and years. I know who I'd like to write the screenplay, and that is the guy who writes Slow Horses. So if
Yes.
anybody has seen that, I adore it. And the screenplay, the humor of the screenplay is exactly what I would love for my books. So his name is Will Smith, not the Will Smith, the other Will Smith.
Okay.
And yeah, I don't think he'd do it because he's a busy man, but I would love it to be him.
Well, never say never, right?
Never say never.
Never know. You never know. I have one last question for you, and then I'll turn around and ask some of the folks here if they have anything. So think up some questions if you do. If you could spend a day or two with one of your characters from your book, who would it be and why? I mean, I'm not going to say any more. Go ahead, you tell me.
Well, I mean, so many of them. I would have loved to spend a day going around Sandringham with Prince Philip, and I would have infuriated him, and he would have been very rude to me, and I wouldn't have cared. And I would have loved to have seen his passion for the estate and everything he was doing with it. I would have really enjoyed that. Obviously the Queen. I mean, yes, to find out how right I was. Wouldn't that be fun?
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I'd love to go riding with Rosie. I mean, I'd be useless. She'd be very good. But yeah, I'd love to meet that character. There are very few actually who I wouldn't enjoy talking to. I mean, there's Sir Simon, the private secretary, who's based on lots of people that I know, including somebody who interviewed me for Rosie's job in real life. Yeah, he'd be a fun character. Yeah, many of them. In fact, even the people who I have as my villains in two of the books, I'd happily meet them. I think they're really interesting people. They just happen to kill people.
And I was going to say, and I think that comes across, I know it's a silly question, but sometimes people, I've interviewed other authors who don't want to meet their characters. And I love the fact that you do, because you want to, especially the Queen, because you want to see how accurate you are. I think that's so great. And I feel like it shows that the love you have for your characters comes across in the writing. And I think that's why the books are so, we love them so much. And you really bring a light for anyone who is watching, who hasn't picked up one of these cozy novels. They really are so enjoyable. They are the perfect antidote for whatever is going on in real life. And I'm so glad I was introduced to them. And I'm going to do a quick turnaround and see if we have any other questions from our fans.
No, it was really enjoyable. Yes, I really.
Okay, so everyone said pretty much I thoroughly asked enough questions, but they are telling me they loved hearing what you've had to say. They love the books, and I can't thank you enough for taking the time, Sophia, to meet with us and to be here at the Locust Valley Library. This is just so great when we can connect our readers to the authors that they love. It means a lot. I know the time difference made it awkward for you too, and I appreciate your flexibility in joining us today.
Well, it's been a pleasure. As you know, I'm such a huge fan of libraries, and it's just delightful to know that you're doing this. So really honored to be asked. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I look forward to the rest of what's coming in this series. I'm so glad to hear you're not working on your last one or anything like that. It's going to be, there's so much more to come. So thank you so much for that, Sophia. And we wish you all the best with your writing.
Thank you, Nadine. It's been really lovely.
Thanks so much. Have a great night and enjoy that event with the writers that's coming up. That should be wonderful. Tell everyone the Locust Valley Library says hello.
I will do that. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.